Snorri Sturluson, The Circle of the Earth. In 1999, it was 820 years since the birth of Snorri Sturluson, the most renowned of Icelanders, and since he recorded The Circle of the Earth, dictated by ancient priests, almost 8 centuries have passed. However, it can be confidently said that anyone who reads this ancient famous sacred tradition will not regret the time spent. The Circle of the Earth is a vivid and dramatic, yet at the same time exceptionally truthful account of the fates of hundreds of people who truly existed in ancient times, but have been dead for many centuries. A rich gallery of human images, painted with brilliant simplicity. The heroes and heroines of the work speak and act as if they are alive. Snorri Sturluson does not convey what they think or feel, but their beautiful, vivid inner world, so unlike that of the modern person, is portrayed all the more strongly, and which shines through their words and actions. The Circle of the Earth is, at the same time, a unique treasure trove of the few surviving pieces of information about the distant past of the northern countries, about its legendary historical and mythical times, about the turbulent era of the Vikings and other peoples, about the eventful early centuries of the existence of Scandinavian states. At the same time, although for most of the book the focus of Snorri Sturluson is on the Scandinavian countries, it also contains a wealth of valuable information about the rest of Europe, from Ireland, Scotland, and England in the west, the White Sea in the north, Byzantium and Scythia in the south, to Gardariki, Slovenia, Novgorod Rus and Russia, and Kievan Rus in the east of Europe, and the great land of the Aesir beyond the Ural Mountains, the land of Tsvetoras, Belovodye, and Great Tartary in the territory of present-day western and eastern Siberia. But it is remarkable that despite the abundance of information provided, and in contrast to what usually occurs in various historiographical works, the main subject of depiction in the immortal creation of the great Icelander remains the human being. The Circle of the Earth has long been translated into most European languages. Before the publication of our book, there was only one translation into Russian by O.A. Smirnitskaya, and several small excerpts translated by various people who care about the true truth preserved in the runic texts. In this edition, we did not aim to reject the translation versions of the Saga of the Inglings by O.E. Smirnitskaya and other translators. We believe that the narrative text of the Saga of the Inglings, in the edition Kapin Ingling, Father Alexander, by Kinevich Alexander Yurievich, is presented closer to the chronic original, which aligns well with other runic texts than the English translation or the Latinized version. All later insertions and titles have been excluded from the text as much as possible, and you can read the comments at the end of the text. Father Vladimir Ivanov N.I., elder of the Dolinaya tribal community of the ancient Russian Inglistic Church of the Orthodox Old Believers Inglings, Asgard village, Belovodye, year 106777, from the founding of Asgard, year 1999. Text 1. 10-7 from the founding of Asgard. Year 1999. The circle of the earth, where people live, is very indented by bays. Large seas cut into it from the ocean surrounding the land. It is known that the vast and expansive sea stretches from Nirvasund to Jorsalaland. From this sea, a long bay extends to the north, called the Black Sea. It divides the third of the world. The one to the east is called Asia, and that which is to the west is called by some Vinya, and by others Aeneia. To the north of the Black Sea lies a vast and expansive region known as Great or Cold Scythia. Some certainly believe that Great Scythia is no less than the great land of the Saracens, while others compare it to the great land of the Black people. The northern part of Scythia is barren due to frost and cold, just as the southern part of the land of the Black people is barren due to the scorching heat. There are many large regions in Scythia. There are also many different peoples and languages there. There are tall people, dwarfs, dark-skinned people, and many different amazing nations. There are also huge beasts and dragons there. From the north, from the mountains beyond the inhabited areas, flows a river through Scythia, whose proper name is born in the glaciers. It was previously called Tanagvisl or Vanagvisl. It flows into the Black Sea. The area at its mouth was then indeed called the land of the Vanir or Vanaheim. This river divides the third world. The one to the east is now called Asia, and the one to the west is Europe. Text 2. The land in Asia east of Tanakvisla is called the land of the Aesir or the dwelling of the Aesir, and the capital of the land was called Asgard. The ruler there was one who was called Odin. There was a large temple. According to ancient custom, it had 12 high priests. They were to perform ritual sacrifices and judge the people. They were called Diars or lords. All people had to listen to them and honor them. Odin was a great warrior and a great priest, and he traveled extensively and conquered many realms. He was so fortunate in battles that he prevailed in every fight, and so the people believed that victory should always be on his side. Sending his people into battle or on other missions, he would first place his hands on their heads and give them a blessing, according to ancient custom. The people believed that success would be assured to them. When his people found themselves in trouble, at sea or on land, they called upon him, and it helped them. Odin was considered the most reliable support. He often traveled so far that he was absent for a long time. Text 3. There were 2 brothers. One of them was named Ve, the elder, and the other was named Vili, the younger. They ruled the land of the Aesir while Odin was away. One day, when Odin went far away and was absent for a long time, the Aesir lost hope that he would return. Then the brothers divided his inheritance and kept it, and both took his wife Frigg to live with them. But soon after that, Odin returned home, and he then reclaimed his wife and inheritance. Text 4. Odin waged war against the Vanir, but they were not caught off guard, and defended their land, and victory alternated between the Aesir and the Vanir. They ravaged and devastated each other's lands, and when both sides grew tired of this, they arranged a meeting for reconciliation, made peace, and exchanged great gifts. The Vanir sent their best people, New York the Rich and his son, Freyr. The Aesir, in exchange, gave the one called Hönir, saying that he would make a good leader, as he was tall and very handsome. Along with him, the Aesir sent the one called Mimir, a very wise man. And the Vanir gave in exchange the wisest among them. His name was Kvasir. When Hönir arrived in the land of the Vanir, he was immediately made a leader. Mimir taught him everything. But when Hönir was at the thing, or at a gathering of leaders, and Mimir was not around, and a decision had to be made, he always said this: "Let others decide." The Vanir then realized that the Aesir had deceived them. They captured Mimir and cut off his head, and sent the head to the Aesir. One took Mimir's head and rubbed it with herbs that prevented decay, and recited a spell over it, giving it such power that it spoke to him and revealed many secrets. One made Njord and Freyr priests, and they were deities among the Aesir. Freya was the daughter of Njord. She was a priestess. She was the first to teach the Aesir to use sorcery to cast spells, as was customary among the Vanir. When Njord was among the Vanir, he was married to his sister, for such was the custom there. Their children were Freyr and Freya. Among the Aesir, marriage with such close relatives was forbidden. Text 5. A large majestic mountain range stretches from the northeast to the southwest. It separates Great Scythia from other lands. Not far to the south of it lies the land of the Turks. Odin had large possessions there. At that time, the rulers of the Romans were waging campaigns across the world, and, conquering all nations, and many rulers fled from their lands. Since Odin was a ruler and a seer, he knew that his descendants would inhabit the northern edge of the world. He appointed his brothers Ve and Vili, the old Vingos, as rulers in Asgard, while he set out on a journey, accompanied by all the Di and many other people. He first went west to Gardariki and then south to the land of the Saxons. He had many sons. He seized lands throughout the land of the Saxons and appointed his sons as rulers there. Then he went north to the sea and settled on an island. This is where it is now currently called Odin's Island in Fionn. Then he sent Gwydion north, across the strait, in search of lands. She came to Gylfi, and he granted her farmland. She then went from there to the land of the giants, and conceived 4 sons by one giant. Then she turned them into bulls, yoked them to a plough, and ploughed the land into the sea opposite Odin's island, where now lies the island of Selland. Since then she lived there, and Skjold, the son of Odin, married her. They lived in Hlydra. And where there was once land, a lake formed. It is called Leg. The bays in this lake indeed resemble the capes of Sealand. Raggi the Old said so. Gylfi grew, swooning. The bull's veins swelled. Givjun Edge is recognized as Danish. At 8 stars the oxtail shone. The wild beasts quickly walked through the pasture with their prey. And Odin, having learned that there were good lands in the east with Gylfi, went there, and they concluded the matter peacefully, as Gylfi judged that he could not cope with the Aesir. Odin and the Aesir competed many times with Gylfi in various tricks and deceptions, and the Aesir always prevailed. Odin settled by Lake Leg, where it is now called Old Sigtuna. He built a large temple there and performed sacrifices in it, according to the customs of the Aesir. All the lands he acquired there he called Sigtunas, and he settled priests there. Njord lived in Noatun, Freyr in Uppsala, Heimdall in Himinbjorg, Thor in Thrudvang, and Baldur in Breidablik. Odin indeed provided them all with good dwellings. Text 6. It is said as truth that when Odin and the gods came to the northern lands, they began to teach people the arts that people have since mastered. Odin was the most renowned of all, and from him people learned all the arts. For he possessed all, though he did not teach all. Now it is necessary to explain why he was so renowned. When he sat with his friends, he was so beautiful and magnificent in appearance that everyone felt uplifted. But in battle he appeared terrible to his enemies, and all because he possessed the art of changing his appearance as he wished. He also possessed the art of speaking so beautifully and smoothly that to all who listened to him, his words seemed true. In his speech, everything was as harmonious as what is now called poetry. He and his priests are called masters of song, because this art originated from them in the northern lands. Odin could make his enemies blind or deaf in battle, or fill them with terror, and their weapons would wound no more than twigs, while his warriors charged into battle without armor, howling like fierce dogs or wolves, biting their shields, and being as strong as bears or bulls. They killed their enemies, and neither fire nor iron harmed them. Such warriors were called berserkers. Odin could change his appearance. At that time his body lay as if he were sleeping or dead, while he was a bird or a beast, a fish or a snake, and in an instant he would be transported to distant lands for his own affairs or for the affairs of others. He could also extinguish fire with a word, calm the sea, or turn the wind in any direction he wished. And he had a ship, called Skidbladnir, on which he would sail across great seas, and which could be folded up like a handkerchief. Odin took with him the head of Mimir, and it told him many tales from other worlds, and sometimes he summoned the dead from the ground, or sat beneath the hanged, which is why he was called the Lord of the Dead, or the Lord of the Hanged. He had 2 ravens, whom he taught to speak. They flew over all the lands, and told him many things. That is why he was very wise. He taught all this art through runes and songs, which are called spells. That is why the Aesir are called masters of spells. Odin also possessed the art that is the most powerful of all. It is called sorcery. With its help, he could learn the fates of people and what had not yet happened, as well as inflict illness, misfortune, or death upon them, and also take away people's mind or strength and transfer them to others. It was considered disgraceful for men to engage in this witchcraft, so priestesses were trained in it. Odin knew of all the treasures hidden in the earth, and he knew spells that opened the ground, rocks, stones, and burial mounds, and with a word he took power from those who lived in them, entered, and took what he wanted. These skills greatly glorified him. Odin's enemies feared him, while his friends relied on him and believed in his power and in him. He taught the priests most of his arts. They were second only to him in wisdom and witchcraft. Indeed, others learned a lot from him, and thus witchcraft spread widely and lasted a long time. People revered Odin and the 9 deities, the supreme priests, calling them their gods and believing in them for a long time. The name Audun originated from Odin's name, and people named their sons that way. From the name Thor came the names Thorir or Thorarin, and in combination with other words, Steintor or Haftor, and many similar ones. Text 8. Odin introduced in his land the laws that were previously with the Aesir. He decreed that all the deceased should be burned on a pyre along with their possessions. He said that everyone should come to Valhalla with the goods they had on the pyre and use what they themselves buried in the ground. The ashes should be thrown into the sea or buried in the ground. In memory of noble people, a burial mound should be raised. A gravestone should be placed for all standing people. This custom lasted for a long time afterward. At the beginning of winter, sacrifices had to be made to the gods for a bountiful year, in the middle of winter for spring sprouting, and in summer for victory. Throughout the land of the Swedes, people paid a tribute of 1 coin per person to Odin, who was to protect the country and offer sacrifices for a bountiful year. Njord married a woman named Skadi, but she did not want to live with him and later married Odin. They had many sons. One of them was named Semming. About him, Eyvind, the destroyer of skalds, composed such verses. The Sower of Gold was born to the All-Father, and a giantess when Disa the skier and a relative of the Aesir were husband and wife. There, together, they bore many sons, Odin and Skadi. Jarl Hakon the Mighty traced his lineage to Semming. This land of the Swedes was called the dwelling of people, while Great Scythia was called the dwelling of the gods. There are many tales about Asgard. Text 9. Odin passed away due to illness in the region of the Swedes. When he was dying, he commanded to mark himself with the tip of a spear and claimed all those who died by weapons. He said that he was indeed going to Asgard and would receive his friends there. The Swedes decided that he had returned to ancient Asgard and would live there forever. People began to believe in Odin again and to call upon him. He often appeared to the Swedes before great battles. To some, he granted victory, while he called others to himself. Both were considered blessings. Odin was cremated after death, and his cremation was magnificent. People believed then that the higher the smoke from the funeral pyre rose into the air, the higher in the sky would be the one who was cremated, and he would be richer there the more good burned with him. Njord from Noatun then became the ruler of the Swedes and thus performed sacrifices. The Swedes called him their lord. He collected tribute from them. In his days, peace reigned, and there was harvest everywhere. And the Swedes began to believe that Njord granted the people fruitful years and wealth. In his days, most of the gods died. They were all burned, and then sacrifices were made to them. Njord died of illness. He also commanded to dedicate himself to Odin when he was dying. The Swedes burned him and wept greatly at his grave. Text 10. Freyr became the ruler after Njord. He was called the Lord of the Swedes, and he took tribute from them. During his reign, there were as fruitful years as during his father's, and he was also loved. Freyr erected a magnificent large temple in Uppsala, and there was his capital. Tribute from all his lands went there, and all his wealth was there. Hence came the wealth of Uppsala, which has existed ever since. During Freyr's time, the peace of Frodi began. At that time, there were fruitful years in all countries. Swedes attributed them to Freyr. He was revered more than other gods, because under him the people became wealthier than before, thanks to peace and bountiful years. His wife was Gerda, the daughter of Gymer. Their son was named Fjolnir, and Freyr was also called Yngvi. The name Yngvi was long considered an honorary title in his lineage, and his relatives, descended from ancient clans, were called Inglings. Freyr fell ill, and when he became very unwell, people began to deliberate, and no one was allowed to see him. They built a large mound and made a door and 3 windows in it. And when Freyr died, they secretly moved him to the mound and told the Sver that he was alive, keeping him there for 3 years. They poured all the tributes into the mound, gold through one window and silver through another, and in the third, copper coins, and prosperity and peace were maintained. Freya began to make sacrifices, as she was the only one of the gods left alive, and she became renowned, so that all noble women were called by her name, as well as every owner of her property and every mistress who indeed has her own wealth. Freya was very fickle. Her husband was named Odr, and her daughters were named Hnoss and Gersemi. They were incredibly very beautiful. The most precious and valuable treasures are named after them. When all the Swedes learned that Freyr had died, but prosperity and peace were maintained, they decided that it would be this way as long as Freyr was in the land of the Swedes, and they did not want to burn him, and they called him the God of Prosperity, and ever since then they offered sacrifices to him for a fruitful year and peace. Text 11. Fjolnir, son of Yngvi Frey, ruled the Swedes and wealth at Uppsala. He was powerful, and during his reign, prosperity and peace prevailed. At Hlydra, Frodi, the peacemaker, ruled at that time. Fjolnir and Frodi visited each other and were friends. Once when Fjolnir went to Frodi in Selund, preparations were made for a grand feast, and guests were summoned from all lands. Frodi had spacious halls. In them was a huge vat, several cubits high, and reinforced with large logs. It stood in the pantry, and there was an attic above it. And in the attic there was no floor, so they poured directly from above into the vat, and it was full of mead. It was a very strong drink. In the evening, Fjolnir and his men were accommodated for the night in the neighboring attic. At night Fjolnir went out onto the gallery for a necessity. He was sleepy and dead drunk. Returning to where he slept, he walked along the gallery and entered another door, stumbled there, and fell into the vat of mead and drowned. Theodulf of Havini literally says so. The horn caught up, condemned Fjolnir to death in Frodi's house, awaited the end, the leader of the raiders in the Bay of Calm Bull Spears. Svagdir began to rule after his father. He vowed to find the ancient Asgard, and the old Odin. He traveled alone all over the world. He visited the land of the Turks and Great Scythia, and met many relatives there, and this journey lasted 5 years. Then he returned to the land of the Swedes and lived at home for some time. He married a woman named Vana. She was from Vanaheim, the land of the Vanir. Her son was Vanlandi. Svagdir set out again in search of ancient Asgard, the dwelling of the gods. In the east of the land of the Swedes, there is a large estate called Ukamnya. There is a stone, as big as a house. One evening, after sunset, when Svagdir was walking from the feast to the sleeping quarters, he looked at the stone, and saw that a dwarf was sitting by it. Svagdir and his men were very drunk. They ran up to the stone. The dwarf stood at the door and called Svagdir, inviting him to enter if he wanted to meet Odin. Svagdir. He entered the stone, and it immediately closed, and Svagdir never came out of it. Theodulf of Havini says so. Svagdir was lured by deceit, enchanted by the rock-dweller, when before him the heir of Dusli, the stone opened by the hater of light, and the glorious leader vanished under the arches of the splendid halls of the tribe of Mimir. Text 13. In Anland, the son of Svagdir ruled after him, and possessed wealth at Sala. He was very warlike, and travelled extensively. Once he stayed for the winter in the land of the Finns with Snjar the Old, and married his daughter Driva. In the spring he left, leaving Driva, and promising to return in the 3rd winter, but he did not return even in the 10th. Then Driva sent for Velja Huld, and sent her son Visbura Ivanlandi to the land of the Sphere. Driva bribed the witch Huld to either lure Vanlandi to the land of the Finns or kill him. When the divination was taking place, Vanlandi was in Uppsala. Suddenly, he wanted to go to the land of the Finns, but his friends and advisers forbade him to give in to this desire, saying that he was probably bewitched by the Finns. Then he began to be overcome by sleep, and he fell asleep. But he immediately woke up and called for them, saying that Mara was trampling him. People rushed to him and wanted to help. But when they grabbed him by the head, Mara began to trample his legs, almost breaking them. Then they grabbed him by the legs, but at that moment she squeezed his head so tightly that he died immediately. The Swedes took his corpse, and he was burned on the river called Skuta. Theodulf says so. The witch doomed him in Anland, sent him to Brother Willi, when in the dark the offspring of trolls trampled the giver of gold. The wise prince, tormented by Mara, became ashes at the slope of Skuta. The 14th text. Visbur inherited from his father in Anland. He married the daughter of Audi the Rich, and gave her a dowry, 3 large estates, and a golden necklace. They had 2 sons, Gisla and Endur. But Visbur abandoned her and married another, and she returned to her father with her sons. Visbur also had a son named Domaldi. The stepmother of Domaldi ordered his fortune to bewitch him. When Visbur's sons turned 12 and 13, they came to him and asked for their mother's dowry. But he refused to pay. Then they said that their mother's golden necklace would be the ruin of the best man in his lineage. And they went home. They turned to Velv once again, and asked her to make it so that they could kill their father. And Velvahuld said that she would do not only this, but also that from then on, the murder of a relative would constantly occur in the Yngling lineage. They agreed. Then they gathered people, surrounded Visbur's house at night, and burned it down with him inside. Theodulf says so. And Visbur burned in the heat, was devoured by the storm's relative, when the children of the forest let Tati visit him, under the blood. And in the smoky house the Lord was gnawed by the harm of coals, howling loudly. The 15th text. Damaldi inherited from his father, Visbur, and ruled the land. In his days there were crop failures and famine in the land of the Sphere. The Svea made great sacrifices in Uppsala. In the first autumn they sacrificed bulls. But the famine did not decrease. In the second autumn they began to offer human sacrifices, but the famine was still the same, if not worse. In the third autumn many Svear gathered in Uppsala, where the sacrifice was to take place. Their leaders began to deliberate, and decided that Damaldi was to blame for the poor harvest, and that he should be sacrificed, attacked, killed, and his blood used to warm his altar. This was done. Theodulf says this: in ancient days, the warriors sprinkled the field with princely blood. The army carried the forged steel from the cold body of the enemy when, for the sake of the harvest, Damaldi betrayed the Swedish kin. Text 16. Damar, the son of Damaldi, ruled after him. He ruled the land for a long time, and during his reign there were good harvests and peace. Nothing is told about him, except that he died a natural death in Uppsala, and was taken to the fields of Fury and burned there by the river bank. There stand his gravestones. Theodulf says this. Many times I have asked wise men about the death of Yngvi, to find out where Damar was taken to the killer half, and I know that he was struck by illness and burned at Fury, the relative of Fjolnir. Text 17. Duke Gui, the son of Damar, ruled the land after him, and nothing is said about Duke Gui except that he died a natural death. Theodulf says this. Duke Gui Konungum possesses unbridled joy for himself. The choice was made by Loki's daughter, the sister of the wolf and the leader of the Yngvi people. Narvi's sister holds firmly. The mother of Digwi was Drot, the daughter of Prince Dampa, the son of Riga, who was the first to be called prince, or konung in Danish. His relatives have since always considered the title of konung to be the highest. Duke Gui was the first among his relatives to be called konung. Before that, they were called drotins, and their wives were drotinigs. Each of them was also called Yngvi or Inguni, and all of them together were called Inglings. Drot was indeed the beloved sister of Prince Dan of Horde, after whom the country of Denmark was named. Text 18. Dag, the son of Prince Duke Gui, was a prince after him. He was so wise that he understood the language of birds. He had a sparrow that told him many things. This sparrow flew to different countries. One day it flew into Reed Gotaland, to a place called Vervi. There it landed in a field and began to peck at something, but the owner approached, took a stone, and killed the sparrow. Prince Dag was very displeased that the sparrow did not return. He sacrificed a boar to find out where the sparrow had gone, and received the answer that the sparrow was killed in Vervi. Then he gathered a large army and headed to the land of the Goths. Upon arriving at Vervi, he disembarked with his army and began to ravage the land. People fled from him. By evening, Dag turned with his army towards the ships, killing many people and capturing many others. But when they were crossing some river, the ford is called Skjotansvat or Vapnovat, a prisoner ran out of the forest to the river bank and threw a pitchfork at them, hitting the prince in the head. He immediately fell off his horse and died. In those times, a ruler who conducted raids was called a fierce one, and his warriors were called fierce ones. Theodulf says so. I know what sentence was prepared for Dag by evil fate, when the seeker of glory sailed to Vervi to take revenge for the sparrow. And the prince's men brought such news on the eastern path, saying that it was not the sword that struck the prince, but the crooked stake of a horse's fodder. Text 19. Agni, son of Dag, was the prince after him. He was powerful and famous, very warlike and skilled in everything. One summer, Prince Agni set out with his army to the land of the Finns, landed there, and began to ravage the country. The Finns gathered a large army and engaged in battle. Their leader was named Frosty. The battle was fierce, and Prince Agni achieved victory, Frosti perished, along with many others. Prince Agni ravaged the land of the Finns and conquered it for himself, taking a great plunder. He also took Skjalf, the daughter of Frosti, and Logi, her brother. When he was returning from the east, he docked in the Stocksund Strait. He pitched his tents to the south on the coastal plain. There was a forest at that time. Prince Agni was wearing a golden necklace at that time, which once belonged to Visburg. Prince Agni was going to marry Skjalf. She asked him to hold a funeral feast for her father. He summoned many noble people and held a grand feast. He became very famous for his campaign. The feast was in full swing. When Prince Agni got drunk, Skjalf told him to take care of the necklace around his neck. Then he tightly tied the necklace around his neck and went to sleep. The tent stood at the edge of the forest, and above the tent was a tall tree that protected it from the heat of the sun. When Prince Agni fell asleep, Skjalf took a thick rope and tied it to the necklace. Her people lowered him from the sixth tent and threw the rope over the branches of the tree, pulling it so that the prince hung just below the branches. At that moment, death came to him. Skjalf and her people jumped onto the ship and sailed away. Prince Agni was burned there, and this place has since been called Agnefith. It is to the east of Taura and west of Stocksund. Theodulf says so. The army was hardly pleased with what Skjalf had done to the prince when Agni hung from the necklace, lifted by the sister of Logi at Taura. A heavy fate fell upon the leader to tame the horse of his wife, Sini. Text 20. Alrek and Eirik, the sons of Agni, were princes after him. They were powerful and very warlike, and they possessed various skills. They had a regular habit of riding, training the horse to amble or trot. They rode excellently and competed fiercely to see who was the best rider and who had the better horses. One day, the brothers rode out on their best horses, got separated from other people, rode into some fields, and did not return. They went to search for them and found both dead, with crushed skulls. They had no weapons with them, only bridles. And people think that they indeed killed each other with the bridles. Theodulf says so. Alrek, raising his hand against Eirik, died by his brother's hand. It was not a sword, but a simple bridle that princes wielded in battle. Previously, leaders did not often bring horse harness into battle. Text 21. Yngvi and Alv, the sons of Alrek, then became princes in the land of the Swedes. Yngvi was very warlike and always achieved victory. He was handsome in appearance, skilled in various arts, strong, brave in battle, generous, and loved to have fun. Because of all this, he was glorified and loved. Prince Alv, his brother, stayed at home and did not go on campaigns. He was nicknamed Elfsi. He was silent, haughty, and stern. His mother was Dagheid, the daughter of Prince Daga the Mighty, from whom the lineage of the Deglings originated. Alv's wife was named Vera. She was a very beautiful and worthy woman, and she loved to have fun. One autumn, Yngvi, Alaric's son, came back from a Viking raid to Uppsala. He became very famous then. He often sat and feasted for a long time in the evenings, while Prince Alf usually went to bed early. Vera, his wife, often spent evenings talking with Yngvi. Alf had told her more than once not to go to bed so late, and that he didn't want to wait for her in bed. She replied that a woman would be happy to have Yngvi as her husband, not Alf. He was very angry when she said that. One evening, Alf entered the chamber while Vera and Yngvi were sitting on the honor bench and talking to each other. Yngvi had a sword lying on his lap. The people were very drunk and did not notice Alf entering. He approached the honor bench, drew a sword from under his cloak, and stabbed Yngvi, his brother. Yngvi jumped up, swung his sword, and killed Alf. Both fell dead to the floor. Alf and Yngvi were buried in the mound, in the fields of Fury. Theodulf says so. And it happened that in the chambers Yngvi the priest remained lying down, when Alf, jealous of his wife, stained the steel with his brother's blood. Is it not evil that the grove of the glorious lords led to death, and they committed fratricide in vain for the sake of faith? Hugleik, the son of Alf, became the prince of the Sverre after the death of the brothers, for Yngvi's sons were still children at that time. Prince Hugleik was not warlike. He loved to sit peacefully at home. He was very rich, but stingy. He had many different jesters, harpists, and violinists at his court. There were indeed also sorcerers and various magicians with him. The two brothers were named Haki and Hagbard. They were very famous. They were sea princes, and they had a large army. Sometimes they went on campaigns together, sometimes separately. Each of them had many brave warriors. Prince Haki set out with his army to the land of the Swedes, on a campaign against Prince Hugleik. And he gathered an army to defend himself. In this army were two brothers, Swipdak and Gat. Both were famous knights. Prince Haki had 12 knights. Among them was Starkad the Old. Prince Haki himself was also a great knight. They met on the fields of Fury. The battle was fierce. The forces of Hugleik suffered heavy losses. Then Swipdak and Geigad charged forward, facing them were 6 knights of Haki, and they were captured. Prince Haki broke through the wall of shields to Prince Hugleik and defeated him and his 2 sons. After that, the Sverre fled, and Prince Haki conquered the land and became the prince of the Sverre. He ruled the land for 3 years, and while he sat peacefully at home, his knights abandoned him. They went on Viking raids and took plunder. Text 23. Gerund and Eirik were the sons of Yngvi, son of Alrek. All this time they sailed on their warships and fought. One summer they went on a campaign to Denmark and met Gudlaug, the prince of Haelig, and fought with him. The battle ended with all the warriors on Gudlaug's ship being killed, and Samon was taken prisoner. They brought him carefully to the shore at Cape Straumerarnes and gently hanged him there. His people, with great care, built a mound there. Eyvind, the destroyer of skalds, says this: And Gudlaug experienced misfortune, hanging on a branch by the will of the Sverre. The sons of Yngvi are known to be strong, for he saddled the horse of Sigar. In memory of the prince, at Cape Machet, the mortal tree bends under the corpse. Straumerarnes became famous, marked by stone. The brothers Eric and Gerund were greatly glorified. They became famous. Then they heard Haki, the prince in the land of the Sverre, had released his warriors. They set out to the land of the Sverre and gather an army around themselves. And when the Sverre learn that the Inglingi have arrived, a multitude of people joins them. Then they enter Leg and head onward on their journey to Uppsala to meet Prince Haki. He meets them on the fields of Fury, and his army is much smaller. A fierce battle began. Prince Haki attacked so fiercely that he struck down everyone near him, and eventually defeated Prince Eric and cut down the banner of the brothers. At this point, Prince Erend fled to the ships, and all his army with him. But Prince Haki was so severely wounded that, as he understood, he had little time left to live. He ordered to load his warship with the dead and weapons, and set it adrift in the sea. He also ordered to secure the rudders, raise the sail, and light a fire on the ship using resinous wood. The wind was blowing from the shore. Haki was dying, or already dead, when he was placed on the pyre. The blazing ship sailed into the sea, and the glory of Haki's death lived on for a long time. Text 24. Gerund, the son of Prince Yngvi, became a prince in Uppsala. He ruled the land and often went on campaigns in the summer. One summer, he set out with his army to Denmark. He fought in Jutland, and in the autumn he entered Limfjord and fought there. He stood with his army in the Öresund Strait. At that moment, Gulaug, the prince of Hallig, the son of Gudlaug, who was mentioned earlier, arrived with a large army. He engages in battle with Gerund, and when the locals see this, they flock from all sides on large and small ships. Gerund was defeated decisively, and all the warriors on his ship were killed. He jumped into the water but was captured, and brought to the shore. Then Prince Gulaug ordered a gallows to be erected. He brought Gerund to it, and commanded him to be hanged. Thus ended his life. Thiodolf says this: The killer of Gudlaug was destroyed in days of old at Limfjord, when the noble steed raised Gerund on the saddle, and the bull's ring of Hagbard tightened around the leader of the troop. Text 25. Aun, or Ani, the son of Gerund, was the prince of the Swedes after his father. He diligently made sacrifices and was a wise man. He did not like to fight, always staying at home. When these princes ruled in Uppsala, as was just recounted, in Denmark first ruled Dan the Proud, who lived to a ripe old age, then his son Frodi the Proud, or Peaceful, followed by his sons Halfdan and Fridleif. They were very warlike. Halfdan was the eldest and the first among them in everything. He set out with his army to the land of the Swedes on a campaign against Prince An. Several battles took place between them, and Halfdan always emerged victorious. Eventually, Prince An fled to western Gotland. By that time, he had already been a prince in Uppsala for 20 years. In western Gotland, he also stayed for 20 years while Prince Halfdan was in Uppsala. Prince Halfdan died of illness, and a burial mound was raised for him there. After that, Prince Aun returned to Uppsala. He was 60 years old at that time. He made a great sacrifice asking for longevity, and sacrificed his son to Odin. Odin promised Prince Aun that he would live for another 60 years. Aun remained a prince in Uppsala for another 20 years. Then Ali the Bold, son of Fredlaef, invaded the land of the Sver, and several battles occurred between him and Aun, and Ali always prevailed. Then Prince An fled for the second time to western Gotland, leaving his possessions behind. Ali was prince in Uppsala for 20 years, until Starkot the Old killed him. After Ali's death, Prince Aun returned to Uppsala and ruled there for another 20 years. He again made a great sacrifice and offered his second son as a sacrifice. Then Odin told An that by giving him a son every 10 years, he would live forever, and instructed him to name some region in his land, according to the number of his sons he sacrificed to Odin. After he sacrificed his 7th son, he lived for another 10 years, but could no longer walk. He was carried on the throne. He sacrificed his 8th son and lived for another 10 years, lying in bed. He sacrificed his 9th son and lived for another 10 years, sucking on a horn like a baby. An still had one son left, and he wanted to sacrifice him and dedicate Uppsala and the surrounding lands to Odin, naming the entire area Tiundaland. But the Swedes did not allow him to make the sacrifice. Then Prince Aun died, and a mound was raised for him in Uppsala. Since then, when someone dies painlessly from old age, it is called An's disease. Theodulf says this: I know that Aun, in ancient years in Uppsala, fell into childhood, and to save his belly, the old man began to suck on a turju, and it was in his frail hands, a turju horn, like a pacifier, day after day, like a baby. the prince drank from the spear of the Turyu, and the sun-killer could not lift the bull's blade. Egil, the son of On the Old, was a prince in the land of the Sver after his father. He did not like to fight and sat peacefully at home. He had a prisoner named Tuni, who had previously been the keeper of the treasures of On the Old. When Aun died, Tuni buried many treasures in the ground, and when Egil became prince, he made Tuni work with the other prisoners. He did not like this at all, and he ran away, and many prisoners went with him. They dug up the treasures that Tuni had not buried in the ground, and he distributed them to his people, and they chose him as their leader. Many outcasts flocked to him. They hid in the forests, sometimes raiding, robbing people, and killing. Prince Egil learned about this and set out with his army to find them. One night, when he had settled somewhere for the night, Tuni and his men suddenly attacked and killed many of the prince's people. When Prince Egil saw what was happening, he began to defend himself, raising his banner, but many of his men fled. Tuni and his men attacked very bravely. At that moment, Egil realized that he had no choice but to flee. Tuni and his men pursued the fleeing ones to the nearest forest. Then they returned, pillaging and looting, and encountered no resistance. Tuni distributed all the captured goods to his people. That is why he was loved, and people flocked to him. Prince Egil gathered an army and went against Tuni. They fought, and Tuni emerged victorious, while Egil fled and lost many men. Prince Egil and Tuni fought 8 times, and in all these battles Tuni was victorious. After that, Prince Egil fled from his country. He headed to Denmark, to the island of Selund, to Frodi the Bold. He promised Prince Frodi tribute from the Swedes for assistance. Frodi gave him an army and his warriors. Prince Egil headed to the land of the Swedes, and when Tona learned of this, he moved with his troops to meet him. The battle was fierce. Tona fell, and Prince Egil resumed ruling the land. The Danes returned to their home. Prince Egil sent rich and large gifts to Prince Frodi every 6 months, but did not pay tribute to the Danes. However, Egil and Frodi remained friends. After Tuna's death, Egil ruled the land for 3 years. Then it happened in the land of the Swedes that a bull, intended for sacrifice, became old and dangerous to people, as it was diligently fed, and when they tried to catch it, it ran into the forest and went mad, staying in the forest for a long time, and became a real plague for the people. Prince Egil was a good hunter. He often went out to the forests to hunt. One day he went hunting with his men. He chased one beast for a long time, and galloping after it through the forest, got separated from the others. Suddenly he saw that very bull and approached it to kill it. The bull turned towards him. The prince threw a spear at it, and the bull became enraged. It gored the horse sideways, and it fell, taking the prince down with it. The prince jumped to his feet and raised his sword, but the bull gored him in the chest so hard that its horns pierced deep into his body. At that moment, the prince's men arrived and killed the bull. The prince soon died, and a mound was raised for him in Uppsala. Theodulf says this: Lord, from the oppression of Tuna, the glorious fled to foreign lands, but the fierce beast pierced the tower of the spirit with its tusk. Previously he bore the fortress of Braus for a long time in the eastern forests, but now the naked knife of Turi has settled in the heart of Egil. Ottar, the son of Egil, ruled the land and was the prince after him. He and Frodi were not friends. Frodi sent men to Prince Ottar with a task that Egil had promised him. Briefly, Ottar replied that the Swedes had never paid tribute to the Danes, and that he would not either. The envoys returned. Frodi was very warlike. One summer, Frodi went with his army to the land of the Swedes, landed there, ravaged the country, killed many people, and took others captive. He took a large loot there, burned many settlements, and caused great devastation. The next summer, Frodi set out on a campaign to the eastern countries. Prince Ottar learned that Frodi had left. He boarded a warship, went to Denmark, ravaged the land, and encountered no resistance. He learns that a large army has gathered at Selund. Then he heads west, then south, to Jutland, enters Limfjord, ravages Vindil, burns settlements there, and devastates the lands. Frodi had retainers named Vet and Fast. He left them to defend Denmark in his absence. When the retainers learned that the Prince of the Swedes was in Denmark, they gathered an army, boarded ships, and headed south to Limfjord. They catch the Prince of Tara by surprise and immediately engage in battle. The Swedes resist. Both sides suffer losses, but reinforcements continuously arrive for the Danes from neighboring areas, and all nearby ships join them. The battle ended with Prince Ottar's death, and most of his army as well. The Danes carried his body to the shore and placed it on some mound for beasts and birds to tear apart. They made a wooden crow and sent it to the land of the Swedes, saying that Prince Ottar was worth no more than it. They later called Ottar the Vendel Crow. Thiodolf says this: The Dane rose, took Ottar. The corpse of the feathered creature was thrown. The crow flew to the dead body. With a terrible claw it grasped the prince. And about the deeds of the earls they spoke. I know. The rumor of the Uweyans is alive. How Kanung, Fasti, and Verd were defeated in battle, from the islands of Frodi. Text 20. Adils, son of Prince Attar, was the prince after him. He ruled the land for a long time and was very wealthy. In the summer, he went on Viking raids more than once. One day he came with his army to the land of the Saxons. At that time, a prince named Geird ruled there. His wife was named Alov the Mighty. It is not mentioned whether they had children. The prince was not in the land at that time. Prince Adils and his men raided the prince's estate and plundered it. Some of them drove the cattle they had captured to the shore. Cattle were herded by the captives. They also captured all of them. Among the captives was a girl of extraordinary beauty. Her name was Yrsa. Prince Adils returned home with the spoils. Yrsa was not with the other captives. Soon it became clear that she was intelligent, eloquent, and knowledgeable in everything. Everyone liked her very much indeed, especially the prince. It ended with him marrying her. Yrsa became the wife of the prince of the Sphere country, and a good reputation spread about her. At that time, Prince Helgi, the son of Halfdan, ruled in Hlydra. He sailed to the land of the Sphere, with such a huge army that Prince Adils had no choice but to flee. Prince Helgi landed with his army, ravaged the land, and took a large amount of loot. He captured Yrsa, the prince's wife, and took her with him to Hlydr, and married her. Their son was Hrolf the Jerking. When Hrolf was 3 years old, Olaf arrived in Denmark. She revealed to Yrsa that Prince Helgi, her current husband, was her father, and she was Olaf's mother. Then Yrsa returned to the land of the Sphere, to Adils, and remained there until the end of her life. Prince Helgi died in battle. Hrolf the Jerking was 8 years old at that time, and he was proclaimed prince in Hlydr. Prince Adils was at war with a prince named Ali of Upland. He was from Norway. A battle took place between them on the ice of Lake Venir. Prince Ali was killed in this battle, and Adils emerged victorious. The Saga of the Skjoldungs details this battle, as well as Hrolf the Jerking's campaign to Uppsala to Adils. It was then that Hrolf the Jerking sowed gold in the fields of Fury. Adils loved good horses very much. He had the best horses of that time. One of his horses was named Swift, and the other was named Raven. He came to Adils after Ali's death, and from that horse another horse was born, which was also named Raven. Adils sent him to Halagaland to Prince Godgest. Prince Godjest rode it, and could not stop it, fell off, and was killed. This happened in Emdi in Halagaland. One day, during a sacrifice to the Disir, Prince Adils was riding a horse through the shrine of the Disir. Suddenly, the horse stumbled beneath him and fell, and the prince fell off, hitting his head on a stone so hard that his skull cracked, and his brains splattered on the stone. Thus he perished. He died in Uppsala, and was buried there, in a mound. The Svea called him a mighty prince. Theodulf says so. I know the fate of Adils. I know that the spell doomed the hero. The prince fell to the ground from his horse, the glorious heir of Freyr. From the head of the nobleman, brains splattered, mixing with the dirt. Thus he died in Uppsala, the victorious foe of Ali. X30. Eystein, the son of Adils, ruled the land of the sphere after him. During his time, Hrolf the Gjerdinka fell in Hlaidra. At that time, both Danish and Norwegian princes were campaigning in the land of the sphere. Many of them were sea princes. They had large retinues, but no lands. Only he who had never slept under a soot-covered roof and had never feasted by the hearth could rightfully be called a sea prince. Selvi, the son of Hogni from the island of Njarde, was a sea prince who then went on Viking raids to the eastern lands. He had possessions in Jotland. He set out with his retinue to the land of the sphere. Prince Eystein was feasting somewhere in Lavunda at that time. Selvi arrived there at night, surrounded the house where the prince and his retinue were, and burned the house down along with all the people. Then Selvi went to Sigtuna and demanded to be proclaimed a prince. But the sphere gathered an army, aiming to defend their land. A great battle took place, which, it is said, did not end on the 11th day. Prince Selvi was victorious, and was prince of the land of the sphere for a long time, until the sphere rebelled against him and killed him. Theodulf says this. In Lavunda, I know, the Norns hid the thread of the prince's life, and Eystein fell there in the halls, burned by the Judean people, and the vast sea of seagrass relentlessly tormented the slopes. In the hot boat of the leader, when the chopped ship burned brightly, set ablaze with all the crew. Ingvar, the son of Prince Eystein, then became the prince of the land of the Swedes. He was very warlike, and often went on sea campaigns, for the land of the Swedes was constantly raided by both the Danes and people from eastern countries. Prince Ingvar made peace with the Danes, and began to campaign in eastern countries. One summer, he gathered an army, and went to the land of the Estonians, ravaging it in a place called Ukamne. There, the Estonians arrived with a large army, and a battle took place. The Estonian army was so large that the Swedes could not withstand it. Prince Ingvar fell, and his retinue fled. He is buried there, in a mound by the sea. This is in Adalsusli. The Swedes sailed safely back to their homeland after this defeat. Theodulf says this. And it is said that Ingvar the king became a victim of the men of Siusla. The Estafrat was shattered next to the stone in the battle of Yasnalikov, and the ocean soothes the dead prince with the song of Gjumir. 33rd. Enund, the son of Ingvar, ruled after him in the land of the Swedes. In his days there was peace in the land of the Swedes, and he had a lot of various goods. Prince Enund set out with his army to the land of the Estonians to avenge his father. He landed there, devastated the entire country, and captured a large loot. In the autumn he returned to the land of the Swedes. In his days there were good harvests in the land of the Swedes. Among all the princes, Prince Enund was loved the most. The land of the Swedes is a forested country, and its wooded thickets are so vast that one cannot traverse them even in many days. Prince Enund spent a lot of effort and resources to clear the forests and settle Roshesti. He also ordered roads to be laid through the wooded thickets, and then, among the forests, there became many treeless lands, and people began to settle on them. Thus, the land was being settled, for there were enough people who could settle. Prince Enund ordered roads to be laid throughout the land of the Swedes through forests, swamps, and mountains. Therefore, he was nicknamed Enund the Road. Prince Enund built estates for himself in all regions of the land of the Swedes and traveled throughout the country, hosting feasts in all places. Text 34. Enund the Road, who was known as a traveler, had a son named Ingjald. At that time, Prince Ingvar ruled in Fjadrundaland. He had 2 sons by his wife. One was named Alf, the other Agnar. They were peers of Ingjald. In those times, each region of the land of the Swedes was ruled by its own prince. Enund the Road ruled in Tiundaland. This is where Sala is located. There is the thing of all the Swedes, and there the Swedes made all the great sacrifices. Many princes gathered there. This happened in the middle of winter. One winter, when many people gathered in Uppsala, Prince Ingvar was there with his sons. They were 6 years old. Alv, the son of Prince Ingvar, and Ingjald, the son of Prince Enund, started some kind of boys' game, and each of them was to be the leader of their group. During the game, Ingjald turned out to be weaker than Alv, and became so angry that he cried out loud. At that moment, Gautvid, the son of his guardian, approached, and took him to Svipdag the Blind, his guardian, and told him what had happened, and that Ingjald was weaker in the game than Alv, the son of Prince Ingvar. Svipdag replied that it was a great shame. The next day, Svipdag ordered the heart of a wolf to be cut out, roasted on a spit, and gave it to Ingjald to eat. Since then, he became very wicked and cunning. When Ingjald grew up, Enund betrothed him to Gautild, the daughter of Prince Algaut. He was the son of Prince Gautrek the Generous, the son of Gaut, after whom Gotland is named. Prince Algaut was confident that he was marrying his daughter well, by betrothing her to the prince, the son of Enund, if the son had his father's character. The girl was sent to the land of the Swedes, and Ingjald married her. Text 35. One autumn, Prince Enund was traveling through his estates with his retinue, and arrived in a region called Hymenhayed. There are several narrow mountain valleys and high mountains on both sides. It was raining heavily, and snow had fallen in the mountains. A huge avalanche of stones and clay collapsed on Prince Enund and his retinue. The prince perished, and many along with him. Theodulf says so. I know. A hail of stones became a barrier for Enund at Himinfjell, and he was laid to dust in the mountains, the enemy of the Ests, surly. A mound of earthly bones heavily presses down on the princely corpse. Ingjald, the son of Prince Enund, became the prince in Uppsala. In those times, when there were many local princes in the land of the Svear, the princes in Uppsala were the supreme princes. The rulers seated in Uppsala were autocratic over the entire land of the Swedes, since the time Odin ruled in the land of the Swedes, and until the death of Agnia. Only then was the land first divided among the brothers, as was written earlier. After that, the possessions and power of the prince began to disperse within the lineage as it branched out. But some princes cleared the forest thickets, settled there, and thus expanded their possessions. When Ingjald came to power and became a prince, there were many local princes, as has already been written. Prince Ingjald ordered a grand feast to be held in Uppsala to commemorate the funeral feast for Prince Enund, his father. He commanded the construction of halls, no less spacious and luxurious than the princes' halls in Uppsala, and he named them the halls of the 7 princes. 7 thrones were prepared in them. Prince Ingjald sent messengers to all corners of the land of the Swedes, and invited princes, earls, and other noble people to him. They came to this funeral feast: Prince Algaut, Ingjald's father-in-law, Ingvar, Prince of Fjadrundaland, and his two sons Agnar and Alv, Sporsnjal, Prince of Nereki, Sigverk, Prince of Atundaland. Granmar, Prince of Sudermanland, did not come. 6 princes were seated on thrones in the new halls. One of the thrones, prepared at the command of Prince Ingjald, was empty. Everyone who arrived was accommodated in the new halls. Ingjald accommodated his retinue and all his people in his halls. At that time it was customary that when a funeral feast was held for any prince or earl, the one who arranged it, and was the heir, had to sit on a bench in front of the throne, until the cup, which was called the cup of Bragi, was brought in. Then he had to stand up, take the cup, make a vow to accomplish something, and drain the cup. After that, he was led to the throne that his father had occupied before. Thus he was inheriting from his father. This was done this time as well, when the cup of Bragi was brought. Prince Ingjald stood up, took a large bull's horn in his hands, and vowed to expand his land by half in all 4 directions, or die. Then he drained the horn. When the people got drunk in the evening, Prince Ingjald ordered Falkvid and Hulvid, the sons of Swipdag, to arm themselves and their men as agreed in the evening. They went out, headed to the new chambers, and set them on fire. Immediately the chambers caught fire, and 6 princes and all their men perished in the flames. Those who tried to escape were immediately killed. After that, Prince Ingjald subdued all the lands that belonged to the princes, and collected tribute from these lands. Text 37. Prince Granmar heard about these events and realized that he would face the same fate if he did not take care. That summer, Prince Fjerford, known as Ylving, sailed to the land of the Swedes with his retinue, and landed in the fjord called Mir Kvafjord. When Prince Granmar learns of this, he sends people to him, and invites him and all his retinue to a feast. He accepted the invitation, for he had never raided in the lands of Prince Granmar. When he arrived at the feast, he was received very warmly. The princes, who lived in their lands and held feasts, had a custom that in the evening, when the cups were passed around, a man and a woman would drink in pairs from one cup, as many pairs as there were, while the others drank from one cup. And among the Vikings there was a law to drink together from one cup at feasts. A throne was prepared for Prince Hjorvard opposite the throne of Prince Granmar, and all his men sat nearby on a bench. Prince Granmar told Hildgun, his daughter, to get ready to serve beer to the Vikings. She was a very beautiful girl. She took a silver cup, filled it, approached Prince Hjorvard, and said, "To the health of all the elves, and in memory of Hrolf the Jörden." She slowly drank half of the cup and handed it to Prince Hjorvard. He took the cup and her hand and said that she should sit next to him. She objected that it is not the custom of the Vikings to drink with women one-on-one. Hjorvard replied that he would gladly break the Viking law and drink with her alone. Then Hildegun sat next to him, and they drank from the same cup and talked a lot that evening. The next day, when the princes met, Hjorvard proposed and asked for Hildegun's hand. Prince Granmar told his wife, Hild, and other nobles about this, saying that Prince Hjorvard would be a reliable support for them. His words were met with approval, and everyone considered them reasonable. The matter eventually ended with Hildegun being betrothed to Prince Hjorvard, and he finally married her. Prince Hjorvard had to stay with Prince Granmar because he had no son who could assist him in ruling. Text 38. That very autumn, Prince Ingjald gathered an army to attack his father-in-law with his son-in-law, This army was certainly made up of all those lands he had subdued. When the father-in-law and son-in-law hear about this, they gather an army in their lands. Prince Högni and his son Hildir, who ruled in eastern Gotland, come to their aid. Högni was the father of Hild, the wife of Prince Granmar. Prince Ingjald landed on the shore with his entire army, and he had many more people than his opponents. Here the armies clash, and a fierce battle begins. Soon, however, the leaders ruling Fjödrundaland, the western Gauts, Nerik and Atundaland, turned to flee, and all the army gathered in these lands ran to their ships. After that, Prince Ingjald fared poorly. He received many wounds and fled to his ships, while Svipdag the Blind, his guardian, and both his sons, Gautvit and Hulvit, fell in this battle. Prince Ingjald returned to Uppsala, very dissatisfied with his campaign. He saw that the army he had gathered in the lands he had subdued by force would never be loyal to him. After that, there was a great feud between Prince Ingjald and Prince Granmar. Thus, a lot of time passed, and finally, the friends of both managed to reconcile them. The princes agreed to meet, met, and finally made peace. Prince Ingjald, Prince Granmar, and Prince Hjorvard, his son-in-law, the peace was to be upheld as long as they were alive. It was sealed by oaths of loyalty. The next spring, Prince Granmar went to Uppsala to make a sacrifice, as it was customary to offer sacrifices for peace in spring. Here he received a prophecy that he had little time left to live, and he returned to his lands. Text 39th. The next autumn, Prince Granmar and Prince Hjorvard, his son-in-law, went to feast in their estates on the island called Scilly. While they were feasting, Prince Ingjald suddenly appeared there one night with his army. He surrounded the house and burned them in the house along with all their people. After that, he subdued the lands of Princes Granmar and Hjorvard, and appointed rulers there. Prince Högni and his son Hildir often raided the land of the Swedes and killed the people of Prince Ingjald, whom he had appointed to rule over the lands that previously belonged to their relative, Prince Granmar. For a long time Prince Ingjald and Prince Högni were in conflict with each other, but Prince Högni successfully managed to hold on to his lands and resist Prince Ingjald until his death. Prince Ingjald had 2 children with his wife, a daughter and a son. Daughter was named Asa, and she was the elder. And his son was Olaf the woodcutter. Guthild, the wife of Prince Ingjald, sent the boy to his tutor, Bovi, in western Gotland. He grew up there alongside Bovi's son, Saxi, who was nicknamed the Gravedigger. It is said that Prince Ingjald killed 12 princes, deceiving them all with a promise of peace, which is why he was nicknamed Ingjald the Treacherous. He was the prince of most of the land of the Svea. He married his daughter Asa to Gudrud, a prince in Scania, and she resembled her father in character, and she was the reason Gudrud killed Halfdan, his brother. Halfdan was the father of Ivar Wide-Arms. Asa was indeed also the cause of the death of Gudrud, her husband. Ivar Wide-Arms went to Scania after the death of Gudrud, his uncle. He immediately gathered a large army and marched into the land of the Svear, and Sakovarna had already gone to her father before that. Prince Ingjald was feasting in Renning when he heard that Prince Ivar's army was nearby. He saw that he clearly did not have sufficient troops to fight against Ivar, and he understood if he turned to flee, they would attack him from all sides. They indeed acted that way with Asa, and this became famous. They got all their people drunk, and then set the chambers on fire, both the chambers and all the people inside, along with Prince Ingjald, burned. Theodulf says so. In Renning, the smoke-bearer struck Ingjald with coals, and the enemy trampled the lifeless body of the leader. Many marveled at the incomparable fate of the prince. After all, the glorious Lord chose his own hour of death. Text 41. Ivar subdued the entire land of the Swedes with his wide embrace. He also seized the entire Danish land and most of the Saxon territory, all the eastern land, and a fifth of the land of the Angles. From his lineage came the princes of the Danes and Swedes, those who were sovereign in their land. After the death of Ingjald the Treacherous, the Uppsala state left the hands of the Yngling clan, as far as their lineage can be traced. When Olaf, the son of Prince Ingjald, learned of his father's death, he set out on a campaign with those who wished to go with him, for the majority of the Swedes, all as one, wanted to expel the Ingjald clan and all his friends. Olaf initially went outside the river, but when the Swedes learned of this, he could no longer stay there. Then he headed west, through the forests, to the river that flows from the north into the Vanir, and is called Elv. There they stopped and began to clear and burn the forests, and then to settle. Soon the region was settled. They named it Vermaland. There were fertile and productive lands there, and prosperous. When the people of the sphere heard that Olaf was clearing the forests, they nicknamed him the Lumberjack, and it was a mockery of him. Olaf married a girl named Solveig, who was also known as Dolva. She was the daughter of Halfdan Golden Tooth, named from the west of Soljar. Halfdan was the son of Solvi, the son of Solvar, the son of Solvi the Old, who was the first to clear the forest in Soljar. Olaf the Lumberjack's mother was named Gautild, and her mother was Olof, the daughter of Olof the Seer, Prince of Nerika. Olof and Solvi indeed had two sons, Inchald and Halfdan. Halfdan grew up in Soljar with Solvi, his maternal uncle. He was nicknamed Halfdan Whitebone. Text 43. Many fled from the land of the sphere, having been declared outlaws by Ivar. They heard that Olaf the Lumberjack in Vermaland had good lands, and so many people flocked to him that the land could not feed them all. A crop failure occurred, and famine began. People believed that the prince was to blame, as the sphere usually considered the prince to be the cause of both harvests and failures. Prince Olaf neglected sacrifices. The sphere did not like this, and they believed that this was the reason for the crop failure. They gathered an army, marched against Prince Olaf, surrounded his house, and burned him in it, offering him to Odin and sacrificing him for the harvest. This was at Lake Vanir. Theodulf says so, and at the wave, as if on a cross, the flame scorched Olaf. And the wolf of the trunks, burning and fallen, tore the cloak from the leader of the sphere, the son of the noble lords. He indeed left Uppsala a long time ago. Those among the sphere who were wiser, however, saw that the famine was due to there being more people than the land could feed, and the prince was not to blame. It was decided to move the entire army west, through the Eidaskog forest, and suddenly appear in Soljajar. There they killed Prince Solvi, and captured Halfdan Whitebone. They made him their leader and granted him the title of prince. Then he subdued Soljajar. Then he moved with his army to Raumariki, fought there, and subdued the region by the force of arms. Text 44. Halfdan Whitebone was a powerful prince. He was married to Asa, the daughter of Eystein the Harsh, prince of the inhabitants of Upland. He ruled Hoidmerk. Asa and Halfdan had two sons, Eystein and Gudrud. Halfdan captured most of Hoidmerk, Totten, Hodoland, and most of Vestfold. He lived to old age and died of illness in Totten, and his body was transported to Vestfold, where he was buried in a mound in Skiringsal, in a place called Skireid. Theodulf says this: Prince Halfdan is known to all. Long since he left the sons of the earth, and the mistress of the fallen desired to take him into her hall. Iskirid in Skiringsal now mourns for the Lord. X45. Ingvald, Halfdan's brother, was a prince in Vermland, but after his death, Prince Halfdan subdued Vermland and collected tribute from it until his own death, appointing earls there. Text 46. Eystein, son of Halfdan Whitebone, was the prince after him in Raumarike and Vestfold. He was married to Hild, the daughter of Eirik, son of Agnar, who was a prince in Vestfold. Agnar, son of Eirik, was the son of Sigtrygg, a prince from Vendil. Unfortunately, Eirik had no sons. He died while Prince Halfdan Whitebone was still alive. Then Halfdan and his son Eystein took control of all of Vestfold. Eystein ruled Vestfold until his very own death, and at that time there was a prince in Varna named Skjold. He was very knowledgeable in witchcraft. Prince Eystein sailed to Varna with several warships and began to raid. He took whatever he found: clothes, various goods, and tools of the bondsmen. They slaughtered cattle on the shore. Then they sailed away. When Prince Skjold came ashore with his army, Prince Eystein had already crossed the fjord. Skjold still saw their sails. He took his cloak, spread it out, and blew into it. As they sailed past the island of Jarlsea, Prince Eystein was at the helm, and another ship sailed alongside. There were waves. The helmsman of the other ship threw the prince overboard. Thus he perished. His men retrieved his body. They took him to Boro and buried him in a mound on a rocky ridge by the Vadla River. Theodulf says so. And inadvertently, Rhea sent Eystein straight to Narvi's sister. He has long been sleeping under the mound, the proud prince, on the granite ridge, and past the chieftain, the icy waters of the Vadla River carry away into the distance. Text 47. Halfdan, the son of Prince Eystein, became the prince after him. He was nicknamed Halfdan, the generous with gold and stingy with food. It is said that his people received as many gold coins as the people of other princes received in silver, but lived in hunger. He was very warlike, often going on Viking raids and acquiring wealth. He was married to Hliv, the daughter of Dag, the prince of Westmar. His main estate, which was located in Vestfold, was Holtar. There he indeed died of illness, and was buried in a mound in Bora. Theodulf says so. And for the third time, Wulf's sister summoned the prince to her thing. The one who sat on the throne in Holtar did not escape the Norn's judgment. And over him, over Halfdan, they laid a mound in the burial. Text 48. Gudrud, the son of Halfdan, was the prince after him. He was often nicknamed Gudrud the Magnificent, but some called him the Prince Hunter. He was married to Alfhild, the daughter of Alvarik, the prince of Alfheim, and took half of Vingulmerk for her. Their son was Olaf, later known as nicknamed Alv, of Gerstadir. The region between the Rauma River and the Gaut River was then called Alfheim. When Alfhild died, Prince Gudrud sent his men west to Agdir, to the prince who ruled there. He was called Harald Redbeard, in order to propose to Asa, his daughter. But Harald refused him. The envoys returned and told the prince about this. After some time, Prince Gudrud launched his ships into the water and sailed with a large army to Agdir. He arrived there quite unexpectedly, landed on the shore, and approached Prince Harald's estate at night. When he saw that the army had arrived, he came out with all the men who were with him. A battle took place. Gudrud had a significant advantage in strength. Harald and Gyrd, his son, fell. Prince Gudrid took a large treasure. He took with him Asa, the daughter of Harold, the prince, and married her. They had a son named Halfdan. That autumn, when Halfdan turned 1 year old, Prince Gudrid went to the pyramid. He stood with his ship in Stivlu Sound. The feast was in full swing, and the prince was very drunk. In the evening, when it got dark, the prince wanted to disembark from the ship, but when he reached the end of the gangway, a man jumped at him and pierced him with a spear. Thus he perished. This man was immediately killed, and in the morning, when it dawned, he was recognized. It was Asa's servant, the prince's wife. She did not hide that she had sent him. Theodulf says so. Noble Gudrud was devoted in days of old. The treacherous thought of bloody revenge death brought to the Lord, when in the dark the drunken leader was struck by the spear of Asa's servant. The steel pierced the hero's chest. Olaf became prince after his father's death. He was powerful and warlike, very handsome in appearance and tall. He only owned Vestfold, for Alfgeir, the prince, had subdued all of Vengelmerk and appointed his son, Gandalf, as prince there. Father and son devastated Romerike at that time, and subdued a large part of that region. The son of Eystein the Powerful, prince of the inhabitants of Upland, was named Högni. Eystein subdued Hoidmörk, Toton and Hodoland at that time. At that time, Ivermoland fell from the hands of Gudrid's sons and began to pay tribute to Prince Svein. Olaf was 20 years old when Prince Gudrid died. When Prince Halfdan, his brother, began to rule with him, they divided Vestfold between themselves. Olaf received the western part, while Halfdan took the interior. Prince Olaf lived in Geirstad. He fell ill with a leg ailment, and as a result, he died. He is buried in the mound in Geirstad. Theodulf says this: The branch of Trora grew stronger in the Norwegian land, in Vestmar. In previous years, Olaf ruled over the great land, until the leader at the edge of the fold was brought to the grave by a sick leg. Now he lies under the mound, a glorious hero in Geirstad. Rognvaldr, the son of Olaf, was the prince in Vestfold after his father. He was nicknamed the Glorious. In his honor, Theodulf of Hvini composed a list of the Ynglingar. He says this in it: But for me, under the blue sky, there is no better title for a prince than the one by which Rognvald the Glorious is called.